Chapter 5, Sexual Education. But Victoria, you cannot! Exclaimed Lord Melbourne in alarm. Easy, Lord M. Nobody knows I'm here. Only our faithful friends, Victoria replied, approaching the bed. As she drew closer to him, Lord Melbourne could see better through Victoria's semi-transparent nightgown, what he was not supposed to see, so he averted his embarrassing gaze, and Victoria became aware of her half-nakedness, and by an instinct of shamefacedness, she covered herself with her arms. But then she smiled mischievously at the effect she'd had on Lord Melbourne. Lord M, we're married. You forgot it already? Victoria asked, amused. How can I forget it, ma'am? But ours was not a classic royal marriage, replied Lord M, with some irony, but unable to avoid a smile. Whatever, we're entitled to a wedding night, even if you're wounded, Lord M, Victoria said. Victoria, please, it's not. Lord Melbourne was about to protest. Please, Lord M. Victoria exclaimed, climbing onto the bed and being very close to Lord Melbourne, I want to be with you tonight. Do not throw me away. I want to have a beautiful memory of the day I married you, she added, looking him in the eye with a tender and pleading look. Lord Melbourne saw her beautiful face, with that touching gesture, and then under his gaze, and saw Victoria's breasts beneath the almost transparent cloth. He felt like the desire was greater the remnants of his common sense, and he realized that he could not resist. Come to bed, Victoria! Exclaimed Lord Melbourne, pushing aside the thick quilt with his left hand. Joyfully, Victoria slipped beneath the bedspread and curled her body to the right side of Lord Melbourne's body, placing one leg over Lord Melbourne's crotch. He wrapped himself in her bedspread, covering the bodies of both of them, and with his right arm on Victoria's back, he drew her in an intimate and protective gesture. She rested her head on his chest, her eyes narrowed. Victoria, my sweet and reckless Victoria, whispered Lord Melbourne, his left hand caressing Victoria's hair. Lord M! She exclaimed, as a tear trickled down her cheek and her body trembled. Are you cold, Victoria? You must be cold in this dress, ma'am, said Lord Melbourne with a certain lewd tone, as he held her tight. It's my nightgown, Victoria said, blushing, feeling Melbourne's heartbeat beneath her cheek. I see, said Lord Melbourne, sliding his hand from Victoria's hair to her naked shoulder. Lord Melbourne buried his face in her hair, aspiring her scent. He gave a soft kiss on the head. Your hair smells great, Lord Melbourne said in a manly tone. I washed it and perfumed it before I came with you, Victoria said, pleased. Victoria, you know how to make me lose my head, like to arouse in me passions that I had not felt since I was very young, said Lord Melbourne. It makes me very happy to hear you say that, Lord M, Victoria replied. Victoria felt the strong and large hands of Lord Melbourne caressing her body, one hand running down her back, the other her bare shoulder. Victoria shuddered and felt excitement and nerves at the same time. Lord M, there is something that I know that because of being hurt you may not be able to consummate our marriage tonight. But, if you want to try, I am willing to do it, Victoria said in a voice broken by the anxiety and nerves. I see, it's a very generous offer, ma'am, Lord Melbourne replied in a sweet voice and a touch of sensuality, and then put his hand under Victoria's chin and gently lifted her head to look into her eyes. And you want my love? Yes. I want to be your woman in every way, William, she replied, her eyes bright, her reflected nerves in the gesture of her face. My beautiful Victoria, my sweet angel, said Lord Melbourne, his voice filled with desire and tenderness simultaneously. Do you know all about the act of physical love between a man and a woman? No. I mean, I know, or I intuit something, but I don't know everything about it, Victoria replied, ashamed and red as a tomato. Lord Melbourne saw her with a strange and intense gaze, between a touch of emotion and lust. Then he kissed her on the lips, a long and soft kiss. Your innocence, your virginity is the best gift you can give me. I love your naivety, Victoria, it's sweet and exciting at the same time. I want you so much, my dear, said Lord Melbourne with that desire reflected in his virile voice. Lord Melbourne kissed her on the mouth, this time a deeper and more passionate kiss. Then Lord Melbourne put his hand on one of Victoria's breasts, over the fabric of her nightshirt. The action took by surprise her, which she shuddered. Easy, Victoria. Let me show you some of that physical love between a man and a woman, said Lord Melbourne, showing Victoria a face of him that she did not know, that of the excited man, the male in heat. With his large and strong hand, Lord Melbourne began stroking and squeezing Victoria's breast above the fabric of the garment, then he put his hand on her shoulder and lowered the strip of her nightgown, until he got her breast out of the nightgown and leave him naked. Lord Melbourne put his hand on her bare breast, and again stroked it and squeezed it, this time in direct contact with the skin. Victoria closed her eyes and gasped, excited and frightened at the same time. Lord Melbourne pinched Victoria's nipple, causing her to utter a small gasp, and the whole body of the girl trembled with a certain force. You make me crazy, Victoria. You make me lose me in desire. I just want to own you, Lord Melbourne said in a gasping and anxious voice. He brought his other hand to her ass and began to stroke her buttocks, and give her little spankings. Lord Melbourne lowered his head and placed his lips on Victoria's bare breast, and then kissed him and Victoria felt things she had never felt before, waves of heat and tingling ran through her body, concentrating on certain parts. She trembled like a flan, and gasped anxiously and desperately. At the same time she rubbed her leg against Lord Melbourne's body instinctively. In the meantime Lord Melbourne made that his hand on Victoria's buttocks clung to the cloth of her nightgown, pulling the garment, revealing her thigh, which he stroked with her warm fingers. "Oh Lord M!" Victoria gasped out of control. "Let yourself go, Victoria. God, how beautiful you are!" Lord Melbourne exclaimed, taking his lips from her breast for a moment, then returning to his work, skillfully using his mouth on the hard nipple, stimulating her. Victoria laid a hand on Lord Melbourne's hair and clung to him. Lord Melbourne pushed his mouth from her breast and now kissed Victoria on the lips, a passionate and almost violent kiss, which almost hurt her. In the meantime, he squeezed Victoria's breast more tightly with his hand. Lord Melbourne lowered his lips and kissed Victoria's neck, and nibbled. With the other hand Lord Melbourne stroked Victoria's buttocks, which he had left naked when he pulled the nightgown. "God, I have a hard time stopping!" exclaimed Lord Melbourne, gasping with weariness and excitement. "Do not do it!" Victoria said, surprised at her own words, also gasping. "Victoria! I have to stop. First of all, because my body is still not in condition, and when I will make love to you for the first time, I want to be able to give my best effort. I will love you as you deserve," Lord Melbourne said with a smile, "and secondly, because when I will love you for the first time, I don't want to do it almost on the sly, as if I were an immoral, one who sneaks into a house to seduce an innocent girl. I want to make love to you like your husband, with pride, without hiding. I want the world to know that you are mine. And I want your first time to be special, for both," he added. "Lord M, that's why I love you." "But it's so hard to stop now," Victoria said, laughing. "If you knew everything about physical love between men and women you would know that it is much more difficult for me." Lord Melbourne replied laughing, as he thought of the bulge in his crotch. "By the way, beautiful attributes, ma'am," he added as he squeezed Victoria's bare breast again. "Lord M, you are very daring," Victoria replied with a nervous giggle as she patted Lord Melbourne's hand that clutching to her breast, then she hid her face in the chest him. "I love you so much, Victoria," he whispered in her ear. The rest of the night they spent talking, occasionally laughing, often kissing, sharing caresses, until both fell asleep. The next day, as soon as the sun rose, there was a knock on the door, and Miss Scarrett opened the door and peered out. Your Majesty! Majesty! Scarlett called. Victoria and Lord Melbourne woke up, and they both raised their heads to see Scarlett. Pardon Majesty, my lord, but Baroness Lazen sent me to fetch her. Your Majesty must return to your bedroom to avoid being seen here. Victoria and Lord Melbourne shared a quick look of disappointment, and she kissed him on the lips. At lunchtime I'll come back to visit you, darling, Victoria said, and hurriedly got out of bed and stood up. Victoria, wait! Lord Melbourne tried to warn her, extending his arm. But it was late. Victoria still had her breast out of her nightgown, and though she noticed it and covered it modestly, already Miss Scarlett had seen it, and the Queen's maiden turned red as a tomato, feeling like an indiscreet witness in an intimate moment of the couple. I wait outside, Majesty. Scarlett said, embarrassed, and closed the door. Victoria and Lord Melbourne exchanged a glance and laughed like two mischievous children, and she threw herself into his arms, kissed him goodbye on the lips, laughing both. A few minutes later Lazen, Victoria and Scarlett were already in the Queen's bedroom. Baroness Lazen looked at Victoria with a suspicious and reproachful look. How was your night, Your Majesty? Lazen asked, trying to sound indifferent. Easy and sweet, interesting, Victoria replied, trying to hide her face and eyes so as not to show away her blush. Interesting? Lazen asked, raising an eyebrow. Lazen. I don't have to give you explanations. But to satisfy your curiosity, it has not happened, the most important, Victoria said, glancing sideways at Scarlett, who was putting the Queen's clothes on the bed, and blushing at Victoria's gaze. I see, Lazen replied, frowning. Lazen, do not look at me like that, claimed Victoria, as a girl who complains about her mother's reprimand after dating a boyfriend on the sly. As well as? Asked Lazen. Like when I was a little girl and I did something wrong. I'm a married woman. Besides, I'm ashamed to talk about this, said Victoria. When they left her alone for a few minutes, Victoria remembered Lord Melbourne's lived moments, kisses and caresses, and remembered the sensation of sexual excitement that she had first lived that way. She felt the heat in her inside, and she laughed alone. Now more than ever she was ready to fight for his love, and determined to take the next step, however risky it was.